Welcome to Offwatch, a podcast by the Ocean Race. This week, it's the turn of Richard Mason, a sailor who's already had a big impact on the race and now taking a role in the race management team, somebody that's helping to shape the future direction of this round-the-world fully crewed challenge. Richard Mason has been involved with every edition of the race since 2001. 6 in total, 4 as sailor, before then becoming a team manager or shore manager for Team SCA, then joining the race management team for the 2017-18 edition. Now, some of those campaigns were notable for breaking trends, like Team SCA and an all-female crew, but some of them were raced at a time where it was still possible to get dangerously close to the ice. 2 in the Volvo 60s, 2 in the Volvo 70s, and you start to appreciate why Richard is such a great source for those stories from the race's past. And of course, now the direction for the race's future. So, Richard, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for giving up your afternoon. And I want to get an update. But before you tell me about all things to do with the Ocean Race in 2022, or indeed the Ocean Race Europe 2021, I want to learn a little bit more about you as a sailor. In all the archive footage that I've seen of you doing the race, you're always smiling. You always look like you're enjoying it. But I wonder if you can take us all the way back to the beginning, because there must have been a time, like all of us, where you're a little bit wet behind the ears. You're jumping on board the boat. You're jumping into the race for the first time. And maybe a lack of experience is being compensated by overconfidence. And I wonder, do you remember the first time that the race, the boats, the challenge knocked your ego down a couple of pegs and told you, do you know what? This is going to be hard.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it keeps your ego in check, this race, over and over again. I think the first time you just had no idea how much trouble you got yourself into. You know, everything was an adventure. The biggest challenge was to just try and sail around the world in the first place and not let your team down. Like, you just wanted to do your role as well as you could. You had no idea what was coming, but you didn't want to be the weak link. So, you know, underneath it all, you were pretty nervous the whole time. I'd say it was around about my third race where I got the ego lesson, you know, where you thought, you know what it was going to take. You were really out there to win. And that was all sort of where you really adjusted from being driven so much by the win, where it became more about how you won and the humanistic side of the race and what you were really involved in. You know, it was around about edition 3 that something kicked in there.
You talk about your role and doing it so much that the boat gets all the way round. And we always hear and we always focus on main trim, foredeck, navigator. But I wonder, with somebody who's got the personality that you have, and you do seem to be somebody that provides energy for your team, were you aware fairly early on that actually one of your strongest attributes, and one of the things that people talk about when they mention you, is that you give people a little bit of a boost maybe when they need it? Was that something you consciously decided to do?
No, it's nothing you consciously decide to do, but you sort of realize. I mean, it took me a long time before I got anywhere near the Traveller. You know, my life lived in the middle of the boat. You know, I was the pit guy and you know, sort of pit / the young fella that as the changes would get worse and more dangerous, the age would come forward from the Traveller and quite happily let the halyard down while you went up there and wrestled the canvas next to the bowman, who was usually your best mate. So it was nothing you consciously do, but you realise that, you know, you had a lot to give. And I think in this race we have a bit of a saying that, you know, you get to know your crew members better than you'll ever know your own wife, because you see people at their absolute best and their absolute worst. Yeah, and sometimes you just got to put a hand out and pick them up. But there'll be other times where someone passes you a cup of coffee and picks you up. You know, it has its highs, it has its lows, but it's all about sort of getting the people around you to keep moving in that direction. And generally, you know, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble in this race. And I've certainly ended up in some ridiculous situations where, I mean, all you can really do is laugh and have a look at the humorous side of it, and to see if you can fight your way out of it, which generally you do. But there's certainly times where you need to apply a bit of humour, because if you didn't anything else, you might realise just how much trouble you were in.
Well, okay, so that brings me to something that I wanted to ask you, because all the way back when we started this interview series, I spoke to Ken Reed, and he was talking about, and this is where I've got to remember it right, but I think it was Ericsson. I think that was the one that he stepped on first of all. And he was saying, and he was saying sort of getting used to the boat and the noise and everything. And he was saying, it's very jarring. So I turned to Rich Mason and I said, is everything all right? And your answer was complete commitment that everything was fine. But he knew at the time, that's just, you're just telling me what I want to hear. You don't really sort of know. I mean, how much of that was you in those situations not allowing yourself to really let those fears come to the top,
Oh, I was absolutely telling him what he needed to hear, because we were in a little bit of shit. We were having considerable structural issues with the boat, and at that particular point, Movie Star had just sunk. I don't know if you remember, but and it was a problem that was notorious for that particular design of boat, that the keel bearings had a bit of a habit of breaking loose. And that sort of led to some major, and we had exactly the same design boat, but we'd probably just done a better job of managing that fault in the boat as we developed with the race. But I was keeping a pretty clear eye on that, and some other structural things around the boat that I knew in some pretty willy weather. It was fresh to frightening, that. And you're always on the edge on those boats. So you built them to sort of, they would break and you'd fix it, and then it became just strong enough. They were never sort of bulletproof and super strong. Definitely with that one, he had a baptism of fire on that leg. We had the unfortunate incident with Hans Horowitz, and then as we came into the approaches of Bay of Biscay into the English Channel, we picked up some pretty fresh weather. So by the time we all got on the dock there, we had a fair amount of boat building lying ahead of us to finish the race, and that was the first edition of those boats. So it was a clean sheet of paper for everybody.
When you look back on that, is it something that you wish? I wish we could completely eliminate that part of the race. Looking after the equipment in that way and that sort of challenge, or is it something that you look at and you think, no, that's part of it? And when you do, like you were saying, you do manage to manage it well, I mean, possibly with a little bit of luck, but you manage it well and you get over those problems, does that just make finishing all the more sweeter?
Well, those are the things that define you in this race. It's getting over those hurdles. And it's not if they'll happen, they will. You're always pushing the envelope in one way or another. We went from pushing the design envelope with the 70s very hard to pushing the human envelope incredibly hard in the 65, sort of one design boat era. You see photos of Bauer going around Cape Horn with, I'm sure some guys loved it. I mean, there were no sails left in the inventory to stick up. They're heading, and you just look at it going, my God, that master's taking some load. So it's kind of what it's all about, and really in this whole race, it's overcoming those moments which allow you to win. And the things you do look back at, you have your time on the podium, but it's very seldom you look at 4 or 5 editions of this race and you have particular wins in your mind. It's more particular situations. You got a result out of that, and you did something incredible with a group of people under very difficult circumstances. I look back at my career in Sanya, which was possibly sportively the worst. We were tailing Charlie the whole time, but there was an atmosphere in that team of just never ever giving up, and we unit, the way the team worked was amazing. It was a really fantastic team to be a part of. Maybe because the pressure and the expectations weren't there, and we were just trying to cause trouble the whole time, which we did most of the time.
There you go. Another great story that we're going to have to dig into at one point. But does that happen accidentally? You know, when you say that teamwork and that cohesion and that everybody lifting each other up, does that happen by accident, or is it something that you have to build and you have to design into the team?
Yeah, you do. You know, and it is built into the team because of the kind of people and characters it takes to get around the world. You know, they need to be people that just don't take no for an answer. But sometimes you can't all be like that, you know. At different times it takes different people. You know, when you're on the water, it's the skipper. You might be, you know, in a medical situation with some crew member injured, and it's actually, you know, the skipper has to take a secondary role. The person who's the medic on board calls the shots and works with the navigator, but you get through the situation and you hand it back to the skipper. Or you break the boat and you end up in a possible part of the world where you've got to fix it, and you're totally in the hands of your shore manager, and you do everything that it takes to take command from him and get the team or her and get in the race. So, but it is just the whole dynamic of the team. And that's what the beauty of this race is about. You know, at the end of the day, it's just this massive human challenge, melting pot of human characters and nature. And I mean, it's never all roses either. You know, I've seen winch handles flying around the deck, and I know there's some sailors out there that are a pretty good shot with a winch handle. But you know, equally, they'll both be in the bar having a beer at the end of the race. But you go through a lot together, and but maybe it's also the fact you just can't get off. You don't have an option. You've got to solve it.
Have you ever had to, you know, mentioning no names and maybe in the early stages of the race, but have you ever had to sort of put your arm around anybody and say, I think you should think carefully about whether you really want to do this race? Have you ever seen warning signs that somebody might be approaching their limit?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, there's plenty of, you know, it's a bit of a classic that, you know, it's as hierarchical as a business. You know, you'll have people who are aspiring to be skippers or watch captains for the title. You know, I want to be the watch captain. I've just come to America's Cup, and I'm pretty bloody handy out there, and I'll be the watch captain, or I'm not coming. And after you've done this race a few times, you think, well, just be careful what you're wishing for, because if you want to have the life of others on your hands and that responsibility at 3 o'clock in the morning in the Southern Ocean, if you make a mistake, you're wearing it. You know, you want to be pretty prepared for it. And I've seen guys learn that the hard way and actually ask to step away from those roles afterwards and you know, have it in a steadier hand. So it's quite interesting, you know, the ocean race and the crews and the characters in it. You can talk about how good you are till the cows come home, but the proof will always come out in this race. So, you know, there are situations where, you know, you see people come and go the time, and generally the team that will win the race is the one that's had the least number of changes, the one that's stuck together from the beginning. And you're pretty careful about getting the right mix of people on the boat. You can't all be skippers. You know, if you got 10 of the world's best skippers and stuck them on the same boat and thought, I have got the best boat in the world, you wouldn't get it off the dock, because no one could agree as to who was going to tie the dock lines, because they'd all want to steer. You know, it takes a lot of different characters and people to make this work.
You know what? Bauer Becking said exactly the same thing when I was interviewing him, and I said, you know, if you don't manage to get a team for the next edition, would you join somebody else's? And he said, maybe for a leg, but it wouldn't work with me being on a team, not being skipper. He said it's just not a role that he could kind of fit into. So it's a really interesting sort of point. So let me ask. Yeah, very honest.
Yeah, that's and that's very important with this race too. You've always got to be honest with yourself, and sometimes there is a time too that you need to step off. You know, I've faced a couple of times where you're carrying an injury, you don't want to give up, You don't tell people about the injury. Generally, it can get too bad, and then you get forced to, then you actually have to step, but you have to do it because there's no point in saying halfway through the leg because, you're so driven, you want to win the round the world race, or, it's up to you. Sometimes to do the best thing for the team, you actually have to bench yourself. And that's a tricky thing too. You can't get out there and then go, oh, by the way, guys, my elbows are bad and I can't actually do the job that I'm supposed to be doing. That you just don't do that.
Is this then a good time to ask you about Rob, and I'm not too sure how to pronounce his surname, but I'm going to go for Rob Hayner, the skipper from Assa Abloy on leg 1, who then stepped off. Yeah, Hayner, apologies. And I'm not sure about the sort of, the ins and outs there. And I'm sure with all these sorts of things, there are stories that, quite happily stay within the team. But I'm just wondering, like you say, there's points where you have to be maybe a bit honest, and that can come from either side, and there's difficult conversations, everything. So from you as a crew member, what's it like when, for whatever reason, there has to be a bit of a change, there has to be a little bit of a rejig, and people's opinion, I can just imagine nerve endings feel a bit frayed. What are those moments like?
Oh, they're pretty brutal. I mean, Roy's was an interesting one. So, Roy was he's a Dutch Olympic sailor in the Finn. Fantastic guy, amazing motivator of young people, brilliant sailor, and he came on board half in the race prior to Assa Abloy. I just remember the name of the boat. It was a Dutch entry. It will come to me in a second. My trivia is a subsidiary of Brunel, actually. I remember it, but he got in that young boat. It wasn't one of the mainstream designs, and he came on board towards the end of the race and racked up some amazing results. Now, Roy is the kind of guy who can take a group of young people and really mould them together into his style of leadership, and he leads from, in his way. And what we had as a team in Assa Abloy was a bunch of really strong sailors. We had Neil MacDonald, Jack Harrington, Clubber Neeloff, Magnus Olsen, Mark Rudiger. So, these were all names in their own right.
Yeah.
So what you really had was the world, one of the best groups of sailors in the world, and all you needed was a great conductor. Because, so you needed one who wasn't really going to lead through trying to override, so to speak, or look for the silver bullet. You needed a pretty steady hand and someone who was going to run he was going to get the best out of his players because he had the best players in the world, if you see what I mean. So that was a classic case of the right leader for the right team. Now, Neil MacDonald's race, he stepped up to the role in Cape Town, and he did an amazing job. But that was for that particular team. We had 10 nationalities out of 12 crew. And Neil is just, if he phoned me up tomorrow and said, Mason, we're going to sail around the world, I'd pack my bags and go. He's one of the most amazing people to watch drive a yacht in the Southern Ocean. Things that we used to sail back in those days. I remember sitting behind him, and he did just in his element. It's the most natural thing in the world to be roaring down the front of a wave at 40 knots, and you sort of go, okay, well, that's cool. But, then Neil went on to skipper Ericsson 1. And that had a whole bunch of challenges for Neil, and a different situation, a different team around him. And, we had some issues there. There was a leadership change on that boat, and that happens. But, every now and then you get the right leader for the right group of people. The Assa Abloy, Neil was the right guy for that group. And we were right on Ilbrook's heels for the last leg to, we were in second, but if we had another leg in the race, we would have been hounding them for first. So it is very unique, and that's something you have to be very careful with when you do this race, that quite often you'll see skippers don't steer the boats in the import races. They're not the 49 or hot shot and around the can sailor. They'll get someone who's good at doing, but they are the guys that will keep the ship rolling. Shabby is a classic.
Yeah.
Brilliant leader offshore. He'll put the right guys on the helm and around him, and they're on the grinding or trimming to the cows, but he will always be there, drive the team along from the underside quietly, pushing away. So it's very interesting to see what it takes to win this race. So that's why this is the bit I love most. I can go on about it forever, but it's fantastic watching the people and the team.
It's really interesting hearing you say that in having heard you say earlier about how so much is that kind of hierarchical ego trip of the title of I'm helm, I'm skipper, I'm watch leader. And like you say, there are those people that, some of them are amazing helms and they should be on the helms. And some of them go, no, that's not what I bring to this team. I'm going to bring the leadership. You're going to drive. I'm going to, like you say, Shabby Fernandez, I'm just going to, winch the hell out of this sail when it needs to be done. What about those sort of softer moments of leadership and those softer moments of kind of personal stuff that we really don't get to see? Because one of the things that I'm always amazed is, you mentioned, you know the sailors better than you know your wife. And it's that thing of like, my mood in the morning is still not great to get the best out of my family that I live with. On a boat, how well do you have to work out how people like to be woken up? Is it that sort of thing of like ripping a plaster off, you give them a shake, you got 30 seconds, you got to get on deck, or is there a softer way to do it?
Oh, there is, some of them you've got to chase them out. Some of them, they take forever to get ready and you need to wake them up 40 minutes beforehand. Otherwise they'll never make it on deck. If the conditions aren't too tough, you'll always go down and put the kettle on and try and get a cup of coffee ready for them before they get up. You'll even keep an eye on you. This will sound a bit dodgy, but you keep an eye on some of the crew when they're going for a wee to make sure that their wee's the right colour. I was a medic on the boat, and there's been several times where I've, it's really, really rough, and the guys go for a wee in a plastic bucket downstairs, and you tend to be going past. It's a bit how you live, and you see it, and it's brown. You're like, mate, when was the last time you drank water properly? You can tell that their performance has been going down for a bit, and you realise they're not drinking enough. So then you go and dig out all the isotopic drinks, and you monitor him, and you make sure you give him his water so that you know that he's drinking enough. And so, you do really get to know the guys, and you realise that some guys it gets really rough. That or if they're getting really frustrated, you need to talk to them a bit, or they can get a bit negative. You need to talk to them and drag them off with some other subject for a while, that might have nothing to do with sailing, and then bring them back home. So it is a continuous exercise about keeping all the cogs of the team rolling.
If that's done well, hell, even if it's done poorly, it's so difficult for us who are watching the race to notice that those kind of invisible strings that you guys are pulling with each other to constantly be getting the best out of the individual. Looking back, can you think of anything that people have done for you in those times where people have kind of had your back, been talking to you in a certain way that maybe at the time you didn't realize, but you look back and you go, yeah, that was getting me to a good place so that I could keep being the good sailor that I am?
Oh, all the time. And those relationships you develop and hang on to for many years. For me, that guy was Graham. He was our shore manager with Arthur Abloy, and in this race and races in the past, it's quite. It seems strange that you go from and then you find yourself in the same shore managers meetings as someone who you've looked up to for advice over the years, but you still sort of go around the back and if there's something you can't unravel, you can't figure out, or you get a quick chat to them, and it becomes a little bit more apparent or less so. But there's an amazing group of people, and you run into them all over the world. It's not just this race that you sail together with them. So it's a unique group of people to you have a lot of fun with them, for better or for worse.
Really interesting, though, that you mentioned shore manager, because I wouldn't have thought that role off the boat was maybe someone that you could lean on. But of course, there are those times where you're like, I haven't been with you for a month, cooped up in a bunk, so actually I can talk to you in a way that
you confide in them.
Yeah,
because when you're cooped up on a boat, it's quite often when you get ashore that you decompress. When you're on a boat, you got a job to do. You're thinking about the next sail change. You're constantly performance based. It's when you get ashore and you look at the result. Maybe you've done well. Maybe you haven't done well, and you're trying to find why. And that's normally where the majority of the conflict is in this race. It's ashore. That's where the changes happen, and 2 or 3 days into it, and someone said, well, you guys have had 3 beds in a row, we need to change something. And, at that point, you may have reflections, but you're sure how to get them out. But it's quite interesting how you set one of these teams up, because one of the key things you can do when you manage and run these teams is make sure that you have a very respected shore-based coach, so that when you come in and debrief, the skipper or the navigator or the watch captains that are running the debrief, it's the coach. And he's taking notes, and, he can be the good cop, bad cop, and also a support or a constructive critic to the skipper. And that doesn't have to be taken back to sea. So, it's not the skipper's voice the whole time. It's not the person who you might actually have a critique with that is actually running the debrief afterwards. So it allows for a more, it can be very relieving to the skipper, but also to the greater team. So, that we see that coming into the race more and more, that, the likes of Neil McDonald and these sort of guys that are, dare I say it, they're less interested in maybe sailing around the world, but in terms of doing the whole race, because these boats are going faster and they're more brutal. And to be honest, you need to be young. You need a young man's or person. I say young man's, but young person's body and mind to get around the world. But these guys have so much to offer and how to manage the team overall and keep that team going.
Well, this becomes the time then that I need to ask you about when you were shore manager for Team SEA, and did you go into it with that sort of, I know what this role can do for the sailors if it's done well? Were you trying to emulate that you saw?
Yeah. I was looking for something to. I mean, at the time, I was actually talking to Ian Walker about joining him with Abu Dhabi as one of the captains. There's a bit of a story. I'd actually signed the paperwork on a Friday and was about to send it through to Ian. And then sort of Richard Bresius phoned me that weekend, and usually when he phones like that, you get a phone call at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and you're a bit like, well, he's not phoning up to say hello. So I was feeling a bit cheeky, and I was just like, well, what do you want? But Magnus Olsen had recently passed away, and obviously Magnus and I, we'd sailed around the world 3 times together, and living in Sweden, we're very close. And there was a bit of a hole in the SCA team that I think that sort of left, and they were looking at a bit of a restructuring as a way to go forward, and they offered me the position to come and work with them as the shore manager. And I just thought it was the most fantastic opportunity in the world to do something different, and to I guess work with the girls and take on some new challenges within the race. It was an uncharted territory for me, so to speak. So I loved it. I think it was one of the best jobs in the race, actually.
Just in the last 20 minutes, you've completely realigned my appreciation of the key roles in any team and what the worth is with certain people. And I wonder that if you hadn't had those positive experiences and seen how powerful the shore management side of things can be when you were offered that role with Team SCA. Magnus Olsen steps away as coach. They need somebody, strong and confident on the shore. If you hadn't have seen how well it was done, would you have seen that as going on the shore? I could go around the world again. Did it take seeing it done well for you to appreciate it?
Oh yeah. I knew it was I was looking for some challenges. I think coming out of the back of Sanya, where I realised it wasn't just the winning of doing this race. I've always been driven by winning, but I think the combination of sailing on Ericsson 3 and Sanya, when I saw the strengths of the team and how powerful, certainly was, our shore team they dug us out of some trouble in the world, some of the most remote parts of the world, they got us back racing. Nothing was a problem. I was very fascinated in that. The Ericsson 3, the shore team, the comeback. We speak about the whole time this epic leg that they did from China to Rio and past all the boats, but it was actually the shore team.
Oh, hang on! Was this the leg? Was this the leg that was like 12,000 miles? That's incredible.
12,000 miles, and then we all sailed through hell to get there. We roughest seas I've seen in my life, and E3, the bloody thing sank. I had to put my sea boot over the hole in the bow while we bailed it out. But it was the effort there of something that was just logistically impossible. We were shipwrecked with a sinking boat attached to a crane on a dock in the middle of the Chinese New Year with all of our equipment in China and Taiwan. Now, Taiwan and China, not great mates at the best of times. Our entire shore team was in China, and we were, in Taiwan, literally I think we ended up replacing the entire bow section of that boat on one side. I think the section of hull that was replaced was over 5 meters long. And it was just unbelievable. We're sitting there going, there's just no way. We're going to have to put this thing on a ship and rejoin race in Rio if we're lucky. And 2/3 of the fleet did that.
Yeah.
But Magnus Olsen just would not accept that. And then we started working the problem. And the problem was amazing. The materials to repair it were in Sweden. Those materials were flown to, I think, the beginnings of Mexico, where they had a CNC machine that they fired up and ran the whole weekend to make a mould of that section of the hull. Then they laminated the section of the dash hull in Italy, put it in a plane and flew it to Taiwan. Meantime, a team of, I think, 14 boat builders was assembled and flown out to Taiwan. We found a yard that was near a coast that built windmill blades that we could get the boat to if we lifted it out and put it on a barge. So we lifted the whole boat out, put it on a barge and shipped it 100 miles down the coast, cut a section of damaged hull out, laminated in the new section, and just to get the boat up to China. And they did a 45-minute turnaround on the dock to put 40 days worth of supplies on the boat, and he joined the leg. Now, to be a sailor on that team was something, having been a part of the entire collective of the Ericsson team. It took every resource we had, including a tremendous resource from Ericsson themselves, belief in us. And it resulted in, Magnus Olsen culminating his career with skippering the boat into Rio with probably the greatest wins ever in the race. And there was no individual in that effort. That was everyone. And it was absolutely something amazing to be a part of. Unbelievable. And I had to step off the boat that leg because I had the back injury like you wouldn't believe. So when we got up to Qingdao, I had to get off. But it was to be a part of putting that together, and it was phenomenal. And that's what, for me, that's what this race was all about. So my views changed a bit after that.
I can completely, like I say, you're giving me a totally new perspective on the value of what goes on for the fans, certainly behind the scenes, we don't get to see it, and we don't get to feel the effect of it in the same way that you guys do as sailors. Yeah, sorry, I've just got so many thoughts swimming around in my head. I mean, honestly, it's just the problem with talking to you is that the conversation never ends, because I come into this with 10 questions and now I'm coming away with 100. I will try and get myself back on track. With Team SEA, with the shore manager, there's one thing that I wanted to ask you, because that was when I think I first met you, when I was first involved with the race, and you were doing some stuff on the commentary side and helping us out there. And one of the things that you were saying was that looking after the boats, and they were all one design, so you all got to inspect each other's boats, and you all got to come on board and have a little look at them. And theoretically, they should all be completely the same. You were saying something, and this might have just been one of those stories that you threw out into the ether one afternoon, but that you put occasionally a little bit of Velcro or a little bit of string or a little bit of something that you could do within the rules. You would attach it somewhere. It was utterly meaningless. It wouldn't do anything, but you only put it on there so that when everybody else came on to inspect each other's boats, you were trying to play with their minds a little bit, that they might go, I wonder what that bit of string there does. And of course, you're not going to tell them, but how much kind of gamesmanship could you do on a one design boat like that?
Oh, quite a bit. Some of it was a bit of leg pulling, for the most part. But there was there has been, I guess, back in the days where there was a lot of development going on, and we head back into that world again with the inclusion of the Mocha class back in the race. There is a fair amount of gamemanship going on. People know you're trying something new, and you'll start rumours on purpose. You can tell one person that oh shit, we tried that out. That was a complete bloody disaster. Don't tell anyone, and then boompa, within 3 days it'll be its full place. And the truth was, it was actually really quick. But you're just trying to buy yourself another few weeks before someone figures out you're onto something. So that's I think that's been used in motorsports and sailing from the get-go. That's for sure.
Oh, no, I'm sure it's never going to end. So with all these experiences then that you've had of learning how much goes on in terms of the life of the sailor and all those interactions in terms of the shore side, in terms of managing campaigns and everything, you then find yourself involved with the race. I've asked you this before. I've never got a satisfactory answer. What is your position within the race? What is your day-to-day? What are you responsible for?
You have to ask Peter Rush, our comms director. Last time he introduced me to a large group of people, he said I was a minister with no mandate. My day-to-day at the moment is working with teams. So I've held several roles in here. In the previous race, I was involved very heavily in the operational side. So I started working with all the host cities and putting together, sort of the infrastructure that goes in there, and that sort of expanded into being the COO of the race, which is overseeing all the operational side of it. So that's everything, sort of logistics, people, moving the whole thing around. And now with the change of ownership and that we've scaled down and we're looking at a new business model with Richard on there. My focus is very much now with teams. So at the moment I'm working with all the new teams to help them set up, make them understand the budgets, people that, what sort of infrastructure they need and how to set themselves up to be able to participate in the race. And that's a pretty crucial role, is you're working with potentially the sort of more French IMOCA teams for them to realise it can seem that we're quite scary and very big. But it's actually, they've got it all there. They have the shore teams, they have the boats, infrastructure, and they don't actually need a lot more to be able to compete in a multiple stop like the ocean race. So, and I find myself getting more and more involved in the commercial side of the race as well. So, And then my other principal role is working with all the crisis management with the race. So when the race is on, I work very closely with Phil Lawrence, and between the two of us, we run the crisis management program for the race, which is, it's pretty busy at times, and as you know. So, that requires a lot of planning and preparation, and then when the race is on, you need to be on your toes most of the time. So, it's certainly challenging, but I think I can honestly say working in the organisation is it's one of the toughest jobs I've ever had, and that's been involved with this race, because with a team you're driven to it has a time period. It has a start and a beginning and a result, either good or bad. But you're driven towards one point, and you've got plenty of other people to fight against. But when you work in the race organisation, there's no beginning or end, and as you finish it, halfway through the race you're delivering, you're already planning the next one. And you have so many stakeholders. You have the teams, you have the sponsors, you have the cities, you have telecommunications, you have the sailors themselves, logistics companies. So, you're really managing a lot of risk and a lot of people that are trying to leverage their position the whole time. So sometimes it can be a pretty tricky role. So, I think probably I wear a lot of hats.
and like you say, I'm sure all of those decisions, all of those hats need to be balanced, and you can't always do one thing because there's all these sort of other things that are going to get affected by it. With that in mind, is there anything that you wish you could go back to the young Richard Mason, and sort of when you're there on your first boat and you're complaining, why does the management make us do this, or why can't the race do that? Is there anything that you go, look, now I'm behind the curtain, I can tell you, I can see why you have to do it like this, or it's not that easy? I'm sure it's a dose of reality.
For sure. Once I really got my head around how difficult the running the race side was, it was like, why on earth would you do this? It's bloody hard, But very, very definitely. But there's also, making sure that the teams and your stakeholders realise that we're actually the facilitators. We're the spider in the web, and we very much are on their team. And it really highlights how important communication is. There may be something that happens with a team that doesn't. That we can't do everything for them, or something doesn't, you can't do a certain leg of the race, and they might just go, it's ridiculous, why are we going there? And they see it from their perspective. But once you explain to them that ships don't go that fast and you can't actually get the race village up in time, or the financial risk that's involved in pulling something like that off, they just go, okay, all right, well, that's fine then. And 45 minutes earlier, they were using all sorts of names to describe your personality. So it can be quite interesting, but it's trust. It all comes down to trust, and it's a beast of a thing to try and pull off. You see what's happening with the America's Cup at the moment, and that's one event in one geographical location. Sure. We have 9.
Yeah.
And across about 8 different cultures, different countries with different resources and different communication. So, it's, I think really, we're a bit more of a United Nations than anything else. We have a lot to cover off in our management meetings, but that's what makes it fun.
I think the biggest lesson that I got was in the last edition, and there was a lot of talk about the course going to something quite pure and quite historical, which it did, and we featured a lot more of the Southern Ocean, but there was all this thing about why can't you just make it 4 legs and everything. And I believe it was Phil Lawrence who pointed out to me that, well, the boats are so much quicker now that you're chasing seasons. And I think I've said this before, and I just want to make sure I get it absolutely right. But in the 2014-15 edition, when the boats were coming up into Newport, the boats were almost so quick that if they'd arrived, I think it was 2 weeks or 1 week earlier, the river would have been
It's frozen.
Frozen. So you wouldn't have been able to get in. And that for me was a factor that I just never would have thought about, that actually you're going so fast. You have to let the season go by before you can come back up again.
We're about to ask them to break out the hairdryers. It was it was not looking good, And that's one of the biggest constraints in the race course. And strangely enough, in this last edition, we had Cardiff in there. And there's a little bit of tide in Cardiff.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit.
Yeah. So one of the biggest constraints of putting the whole race course around together was that you could only be in Cardiff for that weekend in that month.
Cool. Because then we just get too shallow.
From there because, otherwise it's going to be dry, so you just can't go there. And then that affects when you get into Newport, and you've got to make sure people are around Cape Horn, but they can't come around too late. So, there's a lot of geographical and, obviously climate, but, constraints before you start going, okay, now we've got all these cities. Can we actually ship this? Do the shipping work? And trucking and, the shipping. And just prior to the last race, we had a massive global shipping crisis. So, it's not like we can pull out the shipping schedule 4 years out, go, okay, we can ship this, that's fine. It can be that still trying to lock down the shipping routes as the race is starting. And that's quite terrifying, because you imagine the constraints on us if we can't deliver a race because it's sitting on a ship in the Middle East somewhere and didn't make it to where it had to. So, there's so many factors in this.
Yeah, there would be no sympathetic fans in that scenario. Bless them. So let's let the fans know where we are then, because with all the uncertainty, like you say, and it all swirls around in your head, and this is why you're doing your job and I'm doing mine. But obviously for the next edition, we've had a postponement for a year, but also we've had this kind of roadmap laid out in terms of the
10-year plan.
The 10-year plan. So where are we? Give us that sort of bullet point. If you've just joined the ocean race, or indeed if you've had your head in the sand, or other things to worry about, what does it look like now? When are we going to next be able to cheer for the boats?
Well, we're hoping as early as next year. So the postponement's in place, and that at this stage is a copy-cut paste year. And that was purely related to the global situation of COVID, which, thank God we delayed it, because, we certainly are not living in a normal world 5 months later from when we started discussing the delay. Well, what we have realised is that, that created a gap, and we needed to see if we could find something to fill the gap. So we've created the Ocean Race Europe, and working that event up at the moment. And it's been really well, the response to it has been fantastic, both from the city standpoint and from a team standpoint. So the no race is out. The main race, it'll start on the west coast of France, we think, at this stage, and then go probably via Cascais and then into the Med. It's going to be run over sort of 4 to 5 weeks, and the 3 to 4 day legs with a stopover in each city of 2 to 3 days. Sprint sailing for the Amoca class and the BO65s. And at the moment, we could have as many as 6 BO65s. There are 8 in the world. The 7th boat is in Mexico at the moment, and the 8th is with Bianca and Trey down in New Zealand. Now, obviously, a bit difficult for them to bring it up. But I spoke to the Mexicans last week, and they're working very hard to potentially bring the boat back over to Europe to do the Europe race. And response from actually looking at my notes while I'm speaking to you, we discussed this with Amoca yesterday, but they did a survey with the boats, and they said that there's 14 boats that are interested, and maybe we see somewhere between 8 and 10 of those boats entered. So we could have a really good race going on next year. It'll be a nice little punchy taste of the race.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a big marina. 6 65s, 8 60s. I mean, that's a big crowd right there.
Well, yeah, we realise that. So we're busy trying to string it together, but obviously we're also trying to COVID-proof it a bit as well.
Sure.
That's why it's European continent. We're closely monitoring what's happening in Europe. We certainly hope that by spring next year, all the medical advice that we're getting is telling us that, cross our fingers, the vaccine will be in play then, and we should be through the worst of it. The numbers are coming up as we go into autumn, but that's been predicted and as expected. But we certainly hope that when we can be a part of starting next year's summer season with bringing something fantastic for the sailors and for the fans alike to get their teeth through and bring the ocean race to life. And then we'll run to the main race in 22.
And for the main race in 22, obviously we had the course announced, and as you say, the postponement. Everything's just lifted, moved, put down. We know how that's going to look.
Yeah, well, it wasn't actually, dangerous word, that one. We had 9 negotiations to do. So, that's why it took us so long to get the postponement in place. And while we were at it, we sort of realised that was an opportunity to build the 10-year plan. And it's quite incredible. So with all of those cities, not one dropped out. And the way the contracts work, really they had to get out of jail for free card. If they felt that the COVID situation was putting too much pressure on them as a city and uncertainty for events, and they had every right to say, thank you very much, but decline, not one. So there was a tremendous amount of support for the race going forward. But there probably will be some sort of changes in the running order, or I can imagine there'll be some minor changes in timing and things as we get close. I mean, the race is still 3 years away, so you'd expect that. But on the whole, it's copy, cut, paste, which is fantastic. But it does give us a little bit more time to work on that race and get it right. But it also allows us to try and open up the taste and the flavour of the ocean race to more boats to through the Europe race and touch a few more boats in Europe. So we can bring a little bit of the ocean race life to liven up some of the cities of Europe in the early part of next year. It'll be running in the month of June. So
and I mean, I'm guessing not for the Europe tour, because you'll have an awful lot going on. But is there a point? When is the point, I should say? Let's be positive. When is the point that you get to sit back, watch the tracker, watch the race unfold? Us as the fans, we're there. We can be cheering for our favourite boats. We can be following the jury. When do you get to sit back, job well done, and enjoy what you've built for the next edition and beyond?
Pretty much never, because you're always under pressure to.
I'm trying to be positive.
Right, no? Usually, to be honest, I think when you work in the race organisation, the day the race starts, so when you start your first offshore leg, is a moment to breathe and say, well, here we go. You've got to the starting line, and that's the biggest challenge for all these teams, is just getting to the starting line. The plan for sailing around the world, that's pretty much set. You're not going to be able to change it. You kick the snowball off down the hill, and it's just going to get bigger. And there'll be a few along the way where you're going to have to think on your feet and solve most of the operational issues. But on the whole, that's the one where you sit there and go, whew, okay, we managed to get this bit together. Here we go. Buckle up. Let's see if it works. And that's the moment. But then once the race gets going, well, you're head into that, as you know.
Well, I have the easiest and what I would say as well, the best seat in the house. I get to watch all the stresses and strains go past, and I get to have the front row view of the action. So unfortunately, I don't know. But thank you very much, Richard, for talking us through it and making us appreciate just how much is going on behind the scenes, not only in the race management role that you're doing now, but also everything that you've experienced on the shore and as a sailor as well. And It is fascinating to hear what a difference it makes. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure anytime.